I've been looking forward to this call with you. So that part of me is happy in anticipation of the conversation that we'll have. But I'm certainly feeling the weight of this week, and that our country is literally burning. And yeah, wow, it's just been a heavy one.
Yeah, yes, it has. I mean, it seems like things are piling on a bit, and I think for a lot of folks that sort of vicarious trauma that one experiences, not just from personal or viewing other people personally go through trauma, but through our country and individuals in our country going through it.
Yeah.
It's kind of reaching a straw broke the camel's back kind of level.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't tell you how frequently in my feed the image of the officer's knee on George's throat has come through, and I just can't imagine what that's like for a Black American to see unexpected and repeatedly. And it's one thing that I've noticed is LinkedIn tends to be, prides themselves in being strictly professional, right? And things that are more personal or political in nature are meant for other platforms. And I have noticed on LinkedIn this week that all bets are off in regards to that. And maybe it's partly that I've really cultivated a news feed that is full of Black speakers and professionals and equity and inclusion specialists. So, I'm not following a lot of corporate bankers, but for sure. I'm really feeling moved by that. And, I went to bed watching the 3rd Precinct burning, and I know that's not good for sleep hygiene, but it was part of the I can't look away, and I'm not going to allow my white privilege to just be like, oh, it's time for bed, let's turn it all off. And so I'm sitting with that today before we talk.
Well, I mean, I also think there's something so visceral and accessible and connected to the ability to hold on to mindfulness of this idea of I can't breathe. It's so, it speaks to people in a very deep way. That even if you don't understand the politics of it, or even if you, are in some middle ground, or even if you're just completely disconnected from the national discourse, when you hear something like that and see an image like that, we can all identify with the intensity of it.
Yes. We certainly don't know what it's like to be Black in America, you and I.
Yes.
But pretty much all of us have at some point in time struggled to breathe. And we immediately connect to that fear, primal fear and helplessness.
And how connected it is to our feelings of anxiety. This concept of not catching one's breath. So it's very visceral.
It is.
If there's something to be said, it's that hopefully we can engage in discourse with some folks who otherwise wouldn't have, because of the emotional intensity of this experience for our country.
Well, and I'd love for us to throughout the next hour, return to some of this. I know that this is not either of our area of expertise, but I think to just, to return to what you do know about vicarious trauma, and to dig into this a little bit more about your idea around I can't breathe. My goal in this recording is to exchange ideas and to be really honest. And to, I feel like I have some really thoughtful people in my network, and you're one of them, Jim. And not everyone has that exposure. And so while I certainly want to touch on the law and ethics and substance use, et cetera, I feel like it would be phony for us to not exchange in a bit more dialogue around the current state of what's happening. So this started recording as soon as we were both on, but I'm just going to hop on and introduce the program, and then we'll roll right into it.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see. What am I doing here? Okay. Welcome to Radius Cafe. I'm Lori, and today I'm sitting down with colleague Jim Jensen. I met Jim at a ethics conference as part of my continuing ed about a year or so ago. And one of the things that caught my attention right away from Jim is, as he opened, he said, okay, at an ethics training, I need to let you know that the most important thing is you're not allowed to touch your patients and you're not allowed to sleep with your patients. And of course, there was this little knowing laughter from all the therapists and clinicians in the room, because of course we know those things. And you're like, now that that's out of the way, let's move into the important stuff and the juicy stuff. And the reason that really resonated with me, Jim, is because there are some check the box things that have to happen around ethics, around sexual harassment, around the legalese and risk management of what companies and institutions have to do. But then what you did after that setup is you introduced us to this concept of aspirational ethics, and you moved us out of very black and white terrain and into all of the gray areas that we as clinicians and therapists face daily with our patients, with insurance companies, with our obligations to first not harm and to know how we show up and sit with people. And so that was the way that we met, and then we've met a couple 3 times since then in a nice little cafe in Vancouver. And even though I usually have a informal agenda of things that I want to talk with you about, I'm always really pleasantly surprised and delighted with the rabbit holes that we dive into. And so I asked you to be on this program because I know that you can deliver in that regard. So all of that to say, it's good to have you here today, and we will be diving into ethics. And as I said before the show kicked off, I feel like we also need to acknowledge that it is May 2020, and it has been a week of more Black men being killed by police officers, and it has been the week that Amy Cooper called police on Christian Cooper in Central Park, and that as a white woman, I'm really looking at my responsibility and how I show up in a significant way. And I'm curious what your thoughts have been this week, or where your mind's been taking you.
Oh, wow. A deep question. First, I want to thank you for inviting me to speak with you. Laura, you give so much credit to the folks you speak with, but I really think of you as a bit of a muse, that your openness and engagement and willingness to talk about whatever rabbit holes we go down is really so helpful to me in being able to explore issues in more depth from different perspectives, and to be able to use every bit of knowledge I have with the fairness of the places that I don't have expertise. Mm-hmm. And having said that, I think our nation's going through a lot. I think there is a representation of a systemic issue that what has been happening this week plays a role in what you and I know about trauma is not a moment. It is an entire process, and sometimes very often a lifelong process. And when things are so very similar to the traumas we've experienced in the past, it just hurts so much more. That we've set aside some of our troops to guard that, and then now here we are having to fight that battle again with less troops. Now we set more troops and we guard that, and with the repeated dangers that Black men are facing from those that are meant to protect them, I I think that you can't but have some empathy for individuals who are experiencing a culture-wide, nation-wide, systems-wide traumatization and re-traumatization, because the experience isn't just this experience. It's a representation of some of the biggest failings of our nation across its entire history.
Yeah. And can you say a bit more for folks listening that may not have our education about what vicarious trauma is?
Yeah, sure. So vicarious trauma can mean different things in different contexts. When you're talking about people who help others, often vicarious trauma is the experiencing of the experience of sympathy, emotional sympathy and intellectual empathy, being that experiencing the feelings of being with someone who's hurting, and the experience of making the effort to put myself in their experience so that I can better understand it and better be a help to them. In this context, I think what I mean by vicarious trauma is that when one experiences what other people are going through, it's not just a distant experience. Human beings, we have this. Well, is it too early to get into the brain? But our brains,
okay.
almost physically and both the brain and mind, we reach forward with this front part of our brain and connect and bond with other humans, even if we've never seen them in person. And so we have this experience of connecting with and within other individuals, especially if their experience represents something within me or within my identity. And so even myself experiencing what's going on this week, I feel some emotional response and some trauma for myself, and I can imagine that individuals who overlap much more in the cultural and life experiences with individuals going through pain or being killed would experience not just the trauma of what it means in reality for you in this country, but also the trauma of you being in that moment. The part of you, that prefrontal cortex, reaching out and being within that moment for that person.
Well, and on an earlier episode, I talked with Tori Wright about how we embody our trauma and our experiences, and I notice throughout the week this growing tightness in my chest as I am intaking and receiving and trying to sit with all that is happening in our country this week, right? And again, this isn't new. There's a quote going around by Will Smith. This isn't like a new level of racism. It's just being filmed, and so it's more accessible. But that isn't landing on a clean slate. It's landing on the fact that I've been quarantining for the last 8 weeks and I'm already experiencing some isolation. It's landing on the fact that business is slower and there's more financial insecurity for me and for lots of people listening or watching this program. That is compounding everything else that we're feeling. And we in this country do not have a long history of knowing how to hold and process grief and loss. And I know that I'm certainly feeling that compounded grief and the systemic racism and the oppressive institutions that are a part of that. The weight of that, I feel the weight of that.
Yeah, I think we're in a specifically potent time. I think there's sort of two things happening at once. On one hand, we're feeling pulled away and distant from our support structures, from the people that we normally don't even know we lean on, but we do, even if it's just through connection in sharing space, even if it's just a short conversation. On the one hand, we're being pulled away, but I would say even on the other hand, we're being forced to expose ourselves. Normally situations like this, you wouldn't be in my home. You're here. Welcome to my home. And so I don't want to just talk about the way we are pulled away but also we're put in. I mean, you and I, we would sit at, our last few meetings, we sit across the table, but now our faces are very close to one another
Mhm.
due to the nature of
Yeah.
Zoom. And so
Yeah.
in some ways we're pulled away, but in some ways we're exposed. If my dog starts barking right now, it's going to happen, right? So,
Mhm.
so that dichotomy of exposure and also vulnerability, and
Mhm.
also distance from our support structures, which creates another emotional vulnerability, I think puts us all at a place where we experience the anxiety of the moment, maybe even more so.
Yeah. Well, you've come in early on blowing my mind a little bit because um, for you to actually say out loud, we typically sit at a dining table or a little
Hmm.
diner cafe table.
Yeah,
Um, and so there's some intimacy in that. But
yeah,
yes, the intimacy of us being in each other's homes, and that as our brain sees it, I am closer to you than I normally am.
right.
And and the reason why that sort of strikes me is that you're absolutely right. There is more intimacy in our
Some ways.
conversation right now in a lot of ways, even though the fact that I can't see your hands and there's a different shadow on you,
Yeah,
and I'm always being torn between looking at your eyes and looking at my dang camera,
same
right?
thing. Yeah.
So there's a lot of me that's like, there's no intimacy here, and I'm trying to reach Jim and I can't find him. So there's that happening at the same time that there is this high level of intimacy,
Yeah.
and then at that broader place that I live a long ways from Minnesota and I live a long ways from Central Park, and yet I immediately go to my own experience of I have walked through Central Park. And as a woman, I know absolutely what it's like to be in secluded places and to be aware that the only people around me are men who are strangers. And I know what it's like to be raised in Virginia and to implicitly grow up with the notion and the myth that Black men are dangerous. So even though I was not with Amy Cooper this week in Central Park, what she's been fed, the lies she's been fed, are part of the same context that I've grown up in this country. And really, really sitting with, instead of pointing fingers at Amy Cooper and really wanting to distance myself and be like, oh, I'm not that white woman, that I am probably more like her than I would ever want to admit to. And that while I know I can't make this experience about me, because white women do that way too often, that it would be a real missed opportunity to not continue to look at what would I do. I know what it's like to walk through the park with the 9 already dialed on my phone so that I can just hit the 1 and the 1 in case I feel exposed and threatened. I know what it's like to grow up and believe that the police are there to protect me. And I've been thinking a lot about this notion that I don't always expect people to agree with me, for sure. And I don't expect people to trust me until I've established a relationship. But generally speaking, at 46 years old, I do move through the world thinking that people will believe me.
Yeah.
And that is a privilege that has become really pronounced for me. That when I say something with my passion and with the backing up of my education and my experience, I have the lived experience that people don't doubt what I say.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're being confronted with this in a way that I think for a lot of us that live with privilege may allow us to take another look at our privilege and what role we play in sustaining the systemic inequity. I'm close to you, but I'm not any more distant from you than I am from George Floyd in the images we see. And so there is an intimacy that we can and should maybe face with the nature of this specific issue.
Yeah. And I want to reiterate how important it is, as I've come to understand how white supremacy shows up, that it's really okay and necessary for you and I, Jim, to sit with high levels of discomfort and to not expect the world around us to rotate around you and I, and to appease us and acquiesce to us constantly. And that if we're feeling any kind of emotional tug or discomfort around what's happening in our country, what would it be like for us to sit in that and actually learn from it instead of trying to distract and push away?
Yeah, there's this old story of, I may have told this to you once before, but there's this old story of Brewer, who was Freud's mentor, who that he said, I don't know if it's true or not, but that one asked him, or what he said was, if you tell me that you're anxious, I need to know more before I say I'm sorry or congratulations. And I think there's something to be said around specifically awareness of privilege and other equity work, where the anxiety is what we in the business call therapeutic anxiety. That is that often it is anxiety that pushes folks to get the help they need. And I don't want to take that anxiety away. I think it's supposed to be there. The anxiety we're feeling now around this could be therapeutic anxiety. And if we have resolution, in fact, I would say folks who don't want to think about this, they are questing for a resolution of anxiety. They want causal factors. They want one person to blame. Because, and mark my words, as soon as we find some emotional resolution, it will disappear off of the 24-hour news cycle to the detriment of our country. And so our quest for self-soothing anxiety relief, external solutions to our internal problems is part of the issue, is that, well, we're looking for resolution. And once we get a little bit of resolution, we'll stop thinking about it and go back to our day-to-day.
Yeah. Well, and as a substance use disorder counselor, you know a thing or two about self-soothing behaviors and numbing our pain. Yeah. And I certainly want to get into that, but I want to return to something that you said before we started recording around how visceral it is across race, across the country, when we read the words and imagine the experience of I can't breathe. And that for those of us who have mindful practices, who are trying to help others to reconnect with our body, say more about why you think that is so potent.
Well, I think one of the things that our country struggles with is that because individuals don't understand what it's like to be, especially individuals with privilege, they struggle to understand what it's like to not have that privilege, myself included. And so when there are experiences that can be global and visceral in nature, sometimes they can allow us a level of empathy, us meaning all of us, with a level of empathy that we wouldn't otherwise have. And I think there's just something so visceral about I can't breathe that anyone can understand. Even saying it out loud, I can feel the energy build.
Yeah. When you say it out loud, I feel the tightness here.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
and I immediately,
you can see my eyes are starting to get wet. My neck is getting tense. It's the reality of it's so visceral of an experience, and we can all imagine if that was our experience, if we were to die under those circumstances, that it would be horrific, and was horrific, and so. And so when and it connects with mindfulness. I mean, the one of the ways that we're conceptualizing the rigidity and chaos of behavioral health issues, and what are some of the pathways back from that. One of the key components that people have found across all theoretical orientations is this idea of mindfulness, the idea of connecting with one's own body, with breathing, in tuning to the moment. And a big component of that is breath control, biofeedback. And so for those of us in the business of helping folks to move toward health, we know that breath, the ability to have breath, the ability to breathe in and out, is connected with so many aspects of our psyche in the acute and chronic. And so then when we take the flip side, what would it be like if I can't, what is it like when I can't breathe? Well, I can't breathe is a sentence I've heard from people across the spectrums of behavioral health disorders, anxiety, depression, substance use disorder, obsessive compulsive. I mean, this I can't breathe concept is so connected with dysfunction, both individual and systemic, that, I mean, when you're trying to talk about an enmeshed relationship, what's a sentence you might say? I can't breathe, right? So this idea of breath or lack of breath being connected so closely to our emotional experience is something that I think can be a lever to connect us all to George's experience. And should be.
Yeah.
Let's all sit in a room together and say, I can't breathe, and see how it feels.
Yeah.
I mean, people are doing that right now.
Yeah. No. Well, I invite you and I to do that. Let's say it out loud, and then let's just notice a cycle or two of our breath. And for anyone who's listening or watching, to just sit in that moment with us. I can't breathe.
I can't breathe.
Yeah. And for me, again, that returning tightness in chest, tightness in throat. And I know what it is to have panic attacks and to feel like I'm falling. Yeah. I had a really scary experience with my daughter in an ocean where we were both swept out in a riptide. And I had both that fear of losing my own breath, as well as being 2 arms length away from her and her struggle for breath. And so I can pretty quickly go to what it's like, I think all the time about Black mothers in this country, and my inability to imagine what it's like to see them watch their son walk out the door and the world that he lives in compared to my white 12-year-old.
My experience, I couldn't help myself. I soothed. I took deep breaths. There were catches in my breath because of the emotional experience, but I immediately went to coping. It wasn't intentional, but I said it and then immediately tried to soothe myself. There's something there that even for someone trying to sit in the emotional experience, I sort of pulled myself out of it because of how painful it is.
It is painful, and let's normalize that, right? Yeah. That on one hand, it is part of resilience. It is part of our coping strategy that when we face even moments of discomfort, we have ways of pulling ourselves out of the depths of that despair, of that fear, so that we can press on and keep going. And we know that all of us are wildly creative at soothing ourselves to stay away from the pain, even when that pain is our teacher and is part of our healing. And before the call, I was thinking, Jim, about how when I worked as a hospice social worker, and I'd be in either a personal or professional place, and people introduce you, right? You know, if you're at the cocktail party, oh, Lori, what do you do? I work in hospice. I'm doing end-of-life work. And what an immediate buzzkill that is.
Sure, it's like, hey, nice to meet you. They go that way.
Yeah, right. And, you know, and earlier in my life, I was a child protective worker, right? I mean, nobody wants to talk about child abuse, like, especially at a freaking party. And I was like thinking of, you know, introducing you and reading through your bio, and and that you are well versed in addictions. And I mean, nothing is funner to talk about in a party with a cocktail in hand than a substance use counselor. Right?
I have had strangers say, "This is only my second one," and I'm like, "How do I?"
Right, immediately. Well, and then I could be like, and he also teaches a course on law and ethics. And he also knows a lot about systems improvement. And if you have questions about an opiate crisis, Jim's your guy. I mean, it's like you have FUN tattooed on your forehead.
Yeah. I waffle between challenging and boring. That's the zone that I'm in.
Yes, right. Well, I think I certainly find you in the challenging side, not the boring side. But I can imagine that if you wanted to shut up the person beside you on the plane, you could pick which title to introduce yourself with, right?
I actually would err on the side of boring. I have stopped telling folks who cut my hair, which I haven't experienced that in a while. I have stopped telling folks that cut my hair that I have worked as a counselor, because then it's like I am a captive counselor. Oh. So for those folks, I'm going to really lean into the health systems improvement and social systems improvement stuff. They'll just zone out.
So because I don't want our audience to zone out, and because I have a reputation for leaning into the hard things and actually believing that there's some value in us sitting in the discomfort there, we could go a lot of places. We certainly know that through this pandemic and through this quarantining, we are seeing very high sales at our local liquor stores. Mm-hmm. We are knowing that a lot of us are self-soothing with drinking and substance use, and the pandemic is not unique in us making those choices. Just share a little bit about sort of like, because that's where you do so much of your work and have a lot of education, what have been your thoughts in the last couple of months around that? And what's just maybe your perspective in general around the substance use and how some of us may or may not be experiencing that more profoundly right now?
I'd like to speak systemic and then get to individual, because you speaking about leaning into the discomfort makes me want to talk about something, and that is that I in my work here in Southwest Washington, Clarks County and Clicktack County, I work very closely with a lot of behavioral health and health in hospitals and clinics and stuff like that, and so I have a temperature on certain issues that I think I'm very blessed to have, because I get to connect with so many different systems. And here I'm going to go ahead and point at the barometer. I had a meeting with some heads of behavioral health, and we were talking about, I had this theory. So there's this thing that happens in SUD treatment for adolescents.
Tell us what SUD is.
I'm sorry, substance use disorder treatment. Yeah. So people with addictions. So there's this thing that happens with if you do drug counseling for adolescents, which I have done, and that is that during the summer, business goes way down. And someone who's just a statistician might be like, well, all the kids are just stopped using drugs over the summer. And anyone checking into the face validity of that statement would know that's absurd.
Yeah.
So then what is the hidden variable? Well, the hidden variable is they're not connected with systems that are then connecting them to the help they need. They're not going to school and getting caught smoking weed. They're not engaging in some of the other things that would allow them to get connected to the services they need. So that's why the use of adolescent drug treatment goes down way down in the summers, not because people stop using drugs. So we can all function on that assumption. I don't necessarily have the data that says that drug use stays the same or goes up during the summer, but I think we can lean on the face validity of that statement. So okay, great. So now I had this theory that COVID-19 means that access to SUD and other behavioral health services is going to go down. And then when we're all back in public, then folks will get caught drinking at work or whatever, all that stuff that normally gets people connected. They'll more DUIs because they're not just drinking at home or whatever. Yeah. They'll get connected to services. Their behavioral health symptoms won't be as managed by all the soothing that they have within reach at home. And they will get connected with services again. So I came to this meeting with this agenda to bring this up. Really, as a don't shut down your capacities because the storm is coming. That was my perspective. So I went into this meeting with that, and talking with these behavioral health services folks, and they all started looking at their computers, and what almost all of them said was, no, we're at capacity. People are needing us, and we don't have any more room for more people. Because while some outpatient services have seen a dip initially, and maybe even struggling to connect with clients, all those that have been able to make accommodations as far as telehealth, or I'm not going to say all because I haven't talked to all, many of the behavioral health services that have made outpatient go telehealth, and of an even larger majority of the residential behavioral health treatment services, they're at capacity. They're bursting at the seams. So then what does that mean? What is the bad news? Well, the bad news is I still stick to my theory. It's still summertime for adolescents. So it doesn't mean that they're behavioral health services are they're accessing services. Good to go. When COVID, when everybody gets back out in public, nothing will change. No, I still think the storm is coming. It's just that the reservoir is filled. So when we all get back out there and everything gets regular, we're going to have a need for behavioral health services, and we will have at best a maintained capacity. But let's be real. Every one of us knows some behavioral health services that have reduced or shut down because they're not able to pay their bills. So we actually are going to have a diminished capacity where we have, in my opinion, a high likelihood of having the highest need for behavioral health services as far as flat capacity that we have had in maybe ever. And so since we're leaning in here, let's talk about the storm that's coming for behavioral health services capacity.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. I don't know what the solutions are, but I figure if I can spread this news as widely as possible, some folks might.
Jim, first of all, can you define for those who may not understand what behavioral health, what does that mean?
Yeah. So behavioral health used to be synonymous with mental health treatment. So treatment for things like anxiety and disorder, schizophrenia, the kinds of things folks are aware of. But with a move over the last, maybe 10 years or less, there has been this move to incorporate SUD into behavioral health because the theoretical similarities between SUD issues, and also to try and fight for parity, which means equal pay for billable services for SUD, because SUD is clearly a mental health issue among other things. And mental health issues are clearly not just mental health, they're social and biological. And so the idea is that with SUD services being reimbursed at such a lower rate, we're doing a huge disservice because of the interconnectivity, both systems and for individuals, on mental health and substance use disorder treatment. And so behavioral health has become this sort of new describer of both mental health and SUD services as a way of saying this is all the same big ball of messiness.
Ball of messiness. Yes, that's what it is. Okay, so I'm parsing out all the different questions that I could ask you in relation to that. One of them is
since we're leaning into systems, maybe we'll park the individual discussion of what it means that we're all drinking a little more or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose that, but we're kind of digging in here.
No, I agree. Well, the one thing that I was thinking was, here in Oregon, and you can speak to Washington, we are no longer in the crisis level of threat that there will not be enough hospital beds to take care of folks with COVID-19. Is that your understanding?
I do want to say that there are little pockets of areas that are still very much struggling with medical health capacity, not enough respirators or beds. But if we're looking at big picture, you are correct.
Right. And the reason I say that is because the general public does not think about hospital capacity or number of beds in certain departments of a hospital. And that as clinicians and therapists and behavioral health specialists, those that are still in my seniors, in my circle, like you, and talking about the storm is coming, are very much thinking about this storm, this COVID storm has not passed. And the mental health fallout and crisis that is present and still looming. And the domestic violence and physical abuse that we know is happening in homes at a higher rate because people are at home.
Yep.
And that mental health, we know, always carries a stigma, and mental health often looks invisible. And so if we're having a hard time tracking who has coronavirus, we're certainly having a harder time tracking how anxiety and depression and substance use and marital discord and mental health in general, what that is looking like in the face of this pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say that phase 2 of our health capacity issue is behavioral health capacity.
Wow.
I think it is as important an issue. No, I don't know about as. It is also an important issue to be considered on local, regional, state, and national levels. Is what does behavioral health capacity look like? I think most folks, a lot of folks don't think about the need for mental health specifically or SUD treatment until they've been caught or connected by some other system. But even if today I woke up and I realized that my anxiety was reaching a level that I needed help, I would assume that there's somebody waiting for me and that I could get to see someone relatively soon. That's an assumption we all make, in the same way that before COVID, most people would assume that if they had a hard time breathing, they could just go to the hospital and someone would help them breathe.
Right.
I think that maybe is the theme of this discussion, is breathe.
Yeah.
But we realized, not everybody, but many people who are attuned to the national discourse realized that what happens if I can't breathe, COVID or otherwise, and I go to the hospital and they don't have enough respirators? Holy cow, medical capacity is a thing. I think we may be in for an awakening around what behavioral health capacity means as well. But I think the biggest hidden piece is that individuals with the most severe mental health issues are out of sight unless you're in the work. Yeah. Unless you work at a shelter for individuals who are homeless, or you work in forensic mental health, meaning individuals who are connected with the legal system and then get referred into mental health, you may not even know that the bomb is exploding. You won't even know it. You'll just know there seem to be quite a bit more folks at the park that you don't walk through.
Yes.
And that's the only evidence you'll see that the most severe behavioral health issues are not being addressed.
Yeah, and it makes me think too of my friend who works for the local school district. And I think at some level, the average American is hearing about how children living below the poverty level are going to struggle to eat because we're not going to school right now, and we don't have access to food. And my husband works at a school that's all children living in low income, and they're taking food to their families. And as part of his role in teaching has been substituted with being a case manager and making sure that the families of the students that they serve have dinner that night, and they don't all have dinner that night. And so that's just one way, right? Like if the average person is like, oh, I wonder if children are getting fed, but that we don't think about how many children are showing up at school and their guidance counselors or teachers are learning that they're homeless, or that there are mental health problems at home, or that there's physical violence at home. And it's very easy to point to DHS, Department of Human Services, or schools and find fault that they're not doing enough. You and I know that there are not the funds or resources for them to completely do enough, but that it's not just poverty and hunger that's not being addressed as schools are not open, but that it is all of our social ills and all of these behavioral health problems that, if we're not seeing them in the schools or at work, are simply not being addressed.
Yeah, I mean, in adverse childhood experiences is a term for when individuals face extra stressors and trauma during a certain vulnerable period of their lives, If we're looking at a bubble of issues, what happens for individuals who primarily due to or exacerbated by COVID isolation, these individuals are experiencing severe trauma. Well, what we know is that ripples up into the future. Individuals with high levels of adverse childhood experiences, they end up with behavioral health and emotional issues. They end up with some of the other risk factors for children and adolescents and young adults. It has been so connected in the research, adverse childhood experiences and SUD and behavioral health and achievement. It's been so connected in the research that some folks use it as a term almost as if it's causal, as if this causes that. I think it's more complicated than that. But but bringing that up is to say, what is going to happen to our system moving forward if we have a bubble of individuals who have experienced more adverse childhood experiences due to COVID.
And Jim, tell us why this matters to you. Why do the folks listening and watching need to care about the systemic truth around behavioral health?
What a great question. Because when I was working as a clinical supervisor, I made one argument. I had one argument and I was good at it. The argument I would make for procedural systems or integration change as a clinical supervisor was the dignity of human beings. Human beings are worth something. They are valuable separate from their behavior, that they have an intrinsic value to society and to themselves and to their families. So any argument I made was about how can this have an impact on another human being in a positive way. So that's a clear argument. I'll dip into that in just a sec. But what I learned in working with systems is that that doesn't appeal to everybody. There are lots of folks who couldn't give much of a care for. I'm not sure what this is rated. Could give.
You can
couldn't give much
freely.
of a care. Oh, great! Couldn't give two shits about the dignity of people. That they don't believe that every person, every human has intrinsic value. They haven't explored the philosophy of human value or whatever. And so then the question becomes, what do they care about? Well, let's say you care about medical capacity and emergency room department utilization, meaning when you go to the emergency room, you want to be able to be helped, or do you want to sit there for 9 hours because you're not bleeding to death?
Right.
So ED utilization, emergency department utilization is something folks might care about. What about public health? Would you like more or less communicable diseases, air and bloodborne pathogens in your community? What about public safety? I did a review of Clark County, and it came up at, I think, 93% of all property crimes committed in Clark County were either done to obtain money for drugs or done while intoxicated.
Wow.
That's almost all of the property crime is done by individuals with SUD issues, substance use disorder issues.
Yeah.
And so do you care about public safety? Right? Do you care? So these things. Do you care about your children and the people that they're going to be interacting with? Do you care about transgenerational growth, or do you think that our society should go downhill or uphill? I mean, all of these things have links statistically, not just opinion of Jim Jensen. They have statistical links to behavioral health issues. Let's move into just one. Let's talk about something as finite as emergency department utilization. There's this term for individuals who use the emergency department utilization. They're either called high utilizers or they're called complex care patients. Those two terms are so intrinsically connected with behavioral health issues that there have been most health improvement and ED utilization reduction efforts include connecting individuals to behavioral health services and social services. Why? It's because if you want less people in your emergency department, it's not about efficiency. It's not about getting more doctors in the ED. It's about connecting those folks with the mental health, SUD, and social services that they need, like housing and employment. You might not think these things are all integrated, but they most certainly are. And so there's my elevator pitch for why behavioral health matters.
Thank you.
One of those things matter to everybody, right?
Yes. Right. Well, yeah. And the sarcastic part of me as you were talking about the things that are integrated is like, oh yes, maybe they're connected.
Yeah.
And then the other part was, one of the things you said was public health. Do we care
Yeah.
about public health? And I care about public health and you care about public health. But one thing we're learning as we're watching the reopening of America is that a lot of people don't give two shits about public health.
Yeah.
And we're really watching, to move from being sarcastic to being more serious, is this real competing values around the value of the economy and financial stability and my fear of not being able to work, right? Which is, of course, very important to all of us, with the value of health and the value of me wearing a mask because for you, and because I don't know what your health situation is, and if you're immunocompromised or if I may be a carrier, right? And so I would say, even though I know a handful of people who work in public health, even though I can be like, oh yeah, sure, I care about that, it is not something that I generally think about on a regular basis. And I think that I would say that is one of my concerns as an American citizen, is that we don't make public health or access to health or health parity a high value as a society.
Yeah, I mean, there's really two. One of the things that I often try to do is I try to take folks who it would free me to say, I don't understand why they're doing this. And because I'm a clinician and everyone who walks in my office, I understand what they're going through, even if I don't agree. I know that that's just a coping strategy. When I say, I don't know why they're doing this, that's something I'm doing to protect myself. That is not a reality of the situation. And so I get it. If it's safer for you to not understand why they're doing it, because the exploration is too painful and you have to confront the realities of American society and individuals, great, that's fine. But what I want to do is I want to say, what's going on? And we have cultivated in America a personal growth orientation that then has the secondary impact of what is good for me. And so if my grandma is vulnerable, I might wear a mask, even if it's not in congruence with my sounding circle of political beliefs, because I get it. It's for me. I care about grandma. But if I can't find a for me, then everybody's being so sensitive. What are we going to do? So few people die, So there's this, we have built a society in America that is about individual actualization and not systemic actualization. So it's not a surprise to me that we have a healthy dose of individuals that can't find a reason for themselves, and so therefore they're not going to do it. The other piece is I touched on it, is the sounding circles, that we have polarized our society in a variety of ways, and I refuse to pick causal factors. People like to say the polarization of the news, 24-hour news cycle, or the polarization of the political systems. These are causal and they are also systemic, that these are all circular causality. Linear causality is an illusion that lets our anxiety go away, and then we can breathe, and then we stop thinking about it. And so let's instead talk about what sustains the dysfunction in America and not what causes the dysfunction in America. Because if we say what causes the dysfunction in America, that frees us from the anxiety and pressure to make a difference. So let's say what sustains it. So what does that mean? Well, that means that if I'm in a sounding circle and I can't find a personal actualization reason to wear a mask, it's a dumb idea. And so it is not a surprise to me that we are facing this public health issue, because we can't find, and that's why if you're in health messaging or health marketing, your primary goal is to make it matter for the person who's not wearing a mask, because that's what America is about. We don't need to, if you try to appeal to their sense of civic duty, I'm sorry, you're about 80 years late, and even then it wasn't that great. So I think it's a bummer, but it is the reality of America.
Wow. Okay. I'm going to have to for sure go back and watch this part, and then I'm going to like scribble some notes furiously, because yeah, you just dropped a whole lot of sound bites right there. I want to attach a little bit to this need for linear causality as it relates to self-soothing behaviors. Yep. Because where my mind immediately goes is, I work primarily as an executive coach in tech companies, not exclusively tech, but it means that for the last 10 years, most of my work has been with engineers and scientists and very problem-solving, linear, analytical sorts of brains. And those are really smart brains, and I love working with my clients. Yeah. And it makes me think a little bit like I'm trying to like work on that connection between what you just said and what I see. There are a lot of us who are paid to solve problems, and there certainly it's valued in lots of places around the world, but I would certainly say in American culture and as part of white supremacy too, that we really value logic and being able to say, this happens, therefore this happens, right? And you know, people might hear this and be like, Lori thinks science is a white supremacy trait. No, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that we do certainly value analytical analysis over collective wisdom and lived experience. Yeah. And so for you to go back and talk a little bit about the behavioral health part of why that makes us feel good when we can create a simple cause and effect.
Sure. Yeah. So I would say that the realization that an issue is systemic and I am part of this system, that forces me to confront my role in sustaining the dysfunction and forces me to make a change if I want to change the system. If I can draw a line of causal factors that leads either in time before me, or if I can draw a line that leads to someone else other than me, like those darn Republican talk radio people who are telling people not to wear their masks. If I can draw a line that leads to someone else, then I breathe a sigh of relief, lean into my outrage, maybe make a post online, and I'm done. I am done. What can I do? Yeah. And so the nature of linear causality is that it frees the individual doing it from the responsibility to make a difference. I've always thought it was an interesting dichotomy of understanding the systemic nature of a problem pushes me to do something. Whereas oversimplifying a problem or creating a line of causal factors that doesn't lead to you, I don't need to do anything. Yeah. And that is, I gotta say, the cognitive dissonance, I am a good person and something bad is happening, is resolved in only two ways. I change myself, I change my behavior, or I find a reason that has nothing to do with me. And so it is that discomfort resolution that pulls us. We are creatures that stop our own discomfort. And so that's the behavioral health. I know it's not very cerebral, but when we're uncomfortable, we want it to get better. And Absolutely. The two ways it can get better is find someone or something to blame or change my own behavior. And I can tell you which one of those is easier. People with SUD.
No, please go ahead.
So people with SUD issues, this is one of the reasons why their self-concept gets worse and worse. Because they are faced with the choice of stop using drugs, which is really, really hard, or think I'm a piece of shit. And so almost like clockwork, if someone comes in with moderate or severe substance use disorder issues, they will have a horrible self-concept, a really low self-esteem. Why? It's because when I was confronted with spend the money I should be spending on rent, on rent or on drugs, I chose drugs. So I either need to change my behavior or change my self-concept. When I then later on was focused, should I steal money from grandma's purse or should I leave it in grandma's purse? And I chose steal money from grandma's purse. I either can change my behavior, which means stop using drugs, or change my self-concept. And so you see this trend for individuals with substance use disorder issues of having a lower and lower self-concept because they were forced over and over again to choose to go against their brain chemistry and change their behavior, or to just change their self-concept, which happens like that.
Right.
And so I think we're in that same systemic place where we're forced to change our cultural concept or do something about it.
Yeah. Yes. And it makes me think, as nuanced and complicated and unique as we all are, I think it's pretty universal. I want my pain to stop.
Yeah.
I want what's immediately causing me fear, anxiety, shame, self-loathing. I would like that feeling to go away.
Yeah.
And
there's a quick way to make it go away.
Yeah.
Wow, this sounds a little bit like drugs. Blaming is kind of addictive because it works so good. That's the same with drugs. The reason drugs are so addictive is because how darn well they work.
Yes, right. And in the same way that your expertise is substance use and some other areas, one of my expertise is naming fuckery. And what you've just said is how easy and how good it feels to blame, to point fingers, to scapegoat, to make it someone else's problem, right? Play hot potato. And we do that not because we're inherently terrible people, but because it hurts too bad to look at my role in really broken systems. And you know, learning to sit with, instead of pushing it away, what would it be like for even 10 seconds for me to evaluate what is my role and how we got here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go too far into your area of expertise, but one way to conceptualize fuckery is that it is healthy coping strategies gone amok.
Yeah. Yes.
Because there are some healthy coping strategies, but then when you use them too much, you know, the shit hits the fan.
Well, you've just totally validated my work because that's exactly what I say.
Oh, good. Maybe I'm just quoting you. I'm taking credit for something I read of yours. Sorry about that.
Well, I think it might have something to do with our behavioral health background, that the reason that part of my fuckery is people pleasing is because if I make other people feel really comfortable, then I will remain safe. If I get really stuck in my perfectionism and making sure that everything is exactly right, then I won't have to experience the pain of failing or disappointing others. So yes, I say that our fuckery is the shadow side of our strengths. Yep. You know, my strength is that I have an incredible well of empathy and compassion. Mm-hmm. I can find something to hold and to love and to care about in every human being who has ever sat with me. Yeah. And that also means that sometimes my fuckery or habit that damage trust can show up because I can fail to hold people accountable, or I can loosen my boundaries more than they should be. And so it is how I cope and how I serve the world that gets in my own way and trips me up.
Yeah. One of the things I'm teaching, this term I'm teaching a family counseling class. And one of the concepts we talk about is differentiation. Differentiation is an alternative to enmeshment and emotional distance. And it's a really hard concept to understand. So one of the things I've done is break it into two pieces. One piece is a safe, core sense of self. And one piece is emotional intimacy, emotional connection. And I really see, if you break it up into those pieces, you can see that if you over-prioritize a safe, core sense of self, you start to become a bully or you emotionally inaccessible, And if you over prioritize emotional connection, and this is one of the issues you and I may face, you have the issue of not following one's own directives, not setting clear boundaries, or being a chameleon in a space where you probably should have tried to be yourself. Those are issues you and I think face, because if I make a mistake, it's going to be towards enmeshment. And so differentiation is this compass we can set off in the distance, where we can have a fully and complete safe core sense of self, and also be fully and completely connected to those around us, even those that challenge us, even those that hurt us. And so I try to reorient my compass as often as I can when I notice it. I'm getting a little too far off to protecting myself, or I'm getting a little too far off to being emotionally connected and sacrificing myself for it.
Yeah. Well, for those of us who have not gone through therapy or psychology classes, will you tell us what differentiation means?
Yeah. So that is about a 2 or 3 hour conversation.
Okay, just a little snippet.
Yeah. So differentiation, it's easier to talk about it than give a concrete definition, because I think it does a disservice to say anything less than a safe core sense of self while also being emotionally connected. So maybe talking about it means being in a space where you are directed by your own self, and also you are connected with other folks. So really, for each individual, a movement toward differentiation looks different. For many of us who may have come from struggle homes that had some issues, you may move from enmeshed to distanced, and then come back and find where you are, where you belong. And so I don't want to take away the fact that sometimes folks need to travel through emotional distancing on their journey toward differentiation. But when you're in that space of differentiation, you become kind of an emotional heat sink. That is, the heat sink being sort of that thing you connect to a hot piece of metal that diffuses some of that energy. And I think individuals who are more differentiated are those folks who, they don't become dysfunctional dyads where we pass our anxiety back and forth, or we pass our anxiety throughout the system as a way of coping. They become a place where when anxiety comes into them, some of it goes away, and what they give back has less of that dysfunction or less of that anxiety. And so and I haven't met anyone in person that's perfectly differentiated, so it's a concept, not a quality. But it's one of those things that you can set off in the distance on. And we've talked about, when we understand that it's a systemic issue, and that helps us it motivates us that we need to do something about it. One of the do something about it that is congruent with self-development is, how can I engage in this system, connect into this system, talk to that guy who won't wear a mask, and also maintain my core sense of self and my self-directed nature. And so that's working on one's differentiation. How can I connect into those places that hurt me or challenge me while maintaining my safe core sense of self? So differentiation is moving toward being able to do more of that.
Thank you. That was well done in like 2.5 minutes or whatever that was.
Yeah. I hope it was at least coherent.
Yes, yeah. Well, and I suggest any listeners or viewers that are like, what is this? That you can look it up. And is this a Bowlby concept, or who gets credit for differentiation?
Oh, well, I mean, I guess I'm going to lean most heavily on Murray Bowen.
Okay, yeah, okay. Yeah. Awesome. So we do need to wrap up. I will say that hearing you describe it that way puts words to what I am doing when I'm coaching leaders, even though I hadn't quite realized that's what I was doing, in that I want leaders to have a core sense of self, of who they are, not just who they are in the workplace, but who they are, period, because I don't believe you can distinguish that, right? So you get really clear about who you are, what are your strengths, what is your style? How do you communicate? What do you prefer? All that self-awareness stuff, right?
Yeah.
Who you are, how that shows up at work, and then also believing that you have to have good self-awareness before you can move out to have better social awareness. And so I'm trying to help leaders figure out first how to best connect to self so that they can better connect to the people in their organizations, whether those are their reports or their peers or their superiors or their customers. And I certainly, don't have a tagline on my website, I'll help you differentiate as a leader. But I guess that's what I'm doing. And yes, that it is this spectrum, and that no one is ever going to get a freaking gold star from me. You are fully differentiated, right? That doesn't exist.
Right.
But can it be more nuanced? Can we move from the places of rigidity and inflexibility and find where we are more whole and how we create more whole, integrated, healthy systems where we work?
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about feels like it overlaps a whole lot with Edwin Friedman. He has a book written really in language that speaks very much to leaders and business leaders, called Leadership in the Age of the Quick Fix. And so certainly if you have a lot of folks who are in leadership who would like to just dip their toe into differentiation without having to use that term that often, Edwin Friedman's a pretty good start.
And I think what's so ironic or not is that literally you recommended that book to me one time when we met, and I ordered it, and I just found it on a coffee table in my living room like 2 days ago.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm going to take that as my second breadcrumb from Jim to actually open it up and read it.
Yeah, check it out. Because it's one of those books that's written purposely to challenge, purposely to kind of pluck at your strings. So one of the interesting things about reading that book is that it is an experience in developing differentiation. He purposely writes in a language that is both challenging. Sometimes you won't agree with him. And even when I reread it, sometimes I'm like, I don't agree with that. But I think that's one of the fun parts of the experience of reading that book, is that it is both educational and it is an experience in differentiation. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll have to do this again. We can have a little book club about that book. Yeah. We're at time. I want to thank you for showing up like you do when we meet at the cafe, even if you're in your home. And to those viewing and listening, that I can tell you, Jim, that this is part of what keeps me mentally healthy and what keeps me intellectually challenged, is finding new ways to connect with friends and colleagues and collaborators from the safety of our own home. That my mental health takes a really significant dip when I'm not going out of my way to maintain these sorts of relationships. And so that's why Radius Cafe exists. And so it's all about me, so that I feel good. So thanks for helping me feel good and self-soothing. And I'm hoping that for those who watch, that they can tap in a little bit to this mutual respect and appreciation and admiration and genius of ideas, because a lot of us do not have access to that.
Yeah, I want to thank you so much for having me, and Lori, certainly this is great for me too. You make me feel so competent and interesting, and it's so great. And I do want to say that, if there's some interest in us talking more, or talking about digging deeper on specific issues, we kind of jumped around as we often do. I'm certainly I'd love to come back and talk with you some more.
Yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, so let's look for part 2 of this, because I love that we stayed in the systemic place around substance abuse, and I think that that's really important. And I also know that there will be people that listen to this who either are dealing with their own substance abuse issues, or most of us have someone in our immediate circle that is. And I'm just all about normalizing those behaviors and talking about the stigma and making sure people understand where and how to get the help they need. And then I certainly want to come back to talk about aspirational ethics, because it is not a boring topic, and I can't wait to show people how awesome you make it.
Thanks, Lori.
All right. Have a great day. Be well.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye, Jim.